Hello and welcome to Microsoft Hates Greg. My name is Greg Deckler, and today we're going to be talking about this crazy announcement, I guess, that of Fabric databases that's been all in the news since Arun, is announcing the biggest addition to Microsoft Fabric since launch. Fabric databases with industry-leading SQL Server engine, da 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 da. And then, of course, I think there's just been like my feeds have just been blowing up from this manufactured, MVP buzz, promoting this thing. And sorry, I should be using my new term for MVPs that I am borrowing from a friend, unsalaried UBUMPS, right? The Microsoft UBUMPS that are out there, right? The unsalaried but useful Microsoft public salespeople, right? And you can tell I didn't create that term because if I had created the term, it'd probably be more along the lines of, unsalaried but useful Microsoft publicity strumpets, right? Okay. Um, and when's the last time you heard the word strumpet? All right. So anyway, it's been blowing up and clogging my feeds or whatever. So I decided I'm gonna make a video on it because to get cut past the hype on this thing and just get to the real facts about and whether or not it is useful, which my first impression of it, I'm just going to tell you is that in the last 5 years, there's never been a single instant where I was like, hmm, I wish we just had more ways to run SQL Server. If we had more ways to run SQL Server, then my life would be complete. It's never crossed my mind, right? I mean, we can run SQL Server on-prem, we can run SQL Server on-prem on a laptop, we can run it on a server, we can run it in a VM in Azure. We have Azure SQL DB, we have Azure SQL Database Managed Instances, right? And we've got a plethora of ways to run SQL Server. So, like the fact that I have yet another place that I can spin up a SQL Server is like, who cares, right? If that's the biggest thing you've added to Microsoft Fabric, Microsoft, you're in trouble. It's just crazy to me. And besides that, it's the crappy SQL Server, to be quite honest. So, and you're like, what, Greg, the crappy SQL Server? Let's get into it now. I will show you. It's nothing special, guys. It's literally nothing to be excited about. So SQL database and Fabric, right? We've got the LinkedIn, they've got this on Microsoft Learn. It's so new, I couldn't even find it with the Googles and the search engines and stuff. It wasn't coming up. And this literally isn't even in my tenant. They're like, here's how you do it and create. I'm like, yeah, it's not in my tenant. I can't even do this right now. So anyway, okay, blah blah blah. SQL Server, why is it useful? It's about the marketing, blah. But then when you really get into it, here's comparison between Azure SQL Database. So it is Azure SQL Database. They have some wording problems on it's again quality issues with Microsoft, right? So they have database and Fabric uses the SQL Server database engine as Azure's at SQL data. It's like uses the same SQL database engine as Azure SQL Database, right? They can't even get just proper grammar correct around at Microsoft these days. So then they have this little like, okay, SQL database and Fabric versus Fabric SQL database. So basically what you're saying is here's Azure SQL database. You can only run the latest version, right? You don't have any auditing capabilities, right? It's not encrypted. Okay. Yeah, let's see what else. Yeah, they don't have data capture, CDC, database scope, credentials. What else? There's a bunch of stuff that's missing, basically, right? If you go down through this list, that I'm not going to drain the whole list because it's long. But the really one that you really want to like that explains everything, really, in my opinion, about how useless this is this one right here. So this is your comparison guide, your decision guide between Azure SQL Database. And if you notice, it is only serverless. Like when I first got into this, I'm like, I was like, oh, I was trying to do price comparisons, and I'll get into that some of that stuff. There is some positive at least one positive thing that I found for Fabric Azure SQL Database versus not. But basically, like you don't have elastic pools, right? You have very limited ways that you can create them. Um, what else is the other one? Yes, via Fabric automatically. Yes, like blah performance dashboard. You don't have your Azure Monitor, your database watcher. You just got the crappy Fabric stuff that you get. But the biggest one, obviously, is serverless, right? This is the crappy version of Azure SQL database. Okay, people, this is the crappy slow version that nobody really likes to use, um, except for like devs or something like that. But anyway, for non-business critical stuff, you can't run business critical stuff on serverless. Okay, that's not what it's intended for. But anyway, so this is, yeah, this was getting, okay, this is that we'll come back to that. But if you look, this is the one positive thing that I did find is that the one lake storage, which is supposedly where this database store, the data stored in this database is 0.02 cents or 2 cents per 2 cents, sorry, 2 cents per gigabyte. Okay, and that is actually quite a bit cheaper. It's like 5 times less than more or 6 times less than what you'd pay if you were an Azure SQL database in that. We'll come back to this one. In fact, we'll put those two together. Because if you go into Azure SQL database, right, and you flip this to serverless, right, you don't pay for the SQL license, right? They make a big deal of this on the Fabric announcement, like during trial, you're not paying for SQL. It's not you're not being charged for a SQL license. Well, you don't get charged for a SQL license when you run Azure SQL Database serverless. Okay, there is no separate line item for the SQL license, right? It's included, as part of running it. Because you're running the crappy version of it, it's super super cheap, right? And so, you know, it's just included in the cost. But you'll notice down here that the cost of the storage is 11 cents per gigabyte per month. And that's a similar kind of like 10 cents, 11 cents for an Azure SQL managed instance as well. But here's the other thing that you get into with this. So that's the one advantage that I see. But that's why Microsoft's not charging you anything, right, for running Azure, because they'd only be charging you $1.50 anyway, right, or even less, right, in terms of when you spin it up, depending on. And I have no idea about the provisioning rate when you actually go into this thing. I think they actually have like 1 and the 0.5, and then it's only 52 cents, right? So you'd be charging you 82 cents, right? So that's why they're not charging you anything extra, because you're running the crappy version of SQL Server, right? And there you have it. Now the interesting thing, before I like realized that it was serverless in that, I had this set to provisioned, right? And then I'm like, okay, if we're not paying for the SQL license and we have a 3-year reserved instance, I'm paying $100 a month for a 2 vCore, right? And it gets a little dicey in this sort of stuff, but this is the other pages I had open. So you have to go back here and say, okay, 2 vCores, that brings me up to an F16, right? That would be an F16. And then an F16, the price for that, if I can find it, price for that would be $1,250, right, per month with a reservation. Now I don't know if the 2 Power BI vCores right here are the same as 2 vCores here, right? When the apples to apples and all of this gets really dicey when you start comparing all of this stuff. And like what is a capacity unit over here versus a vCore over here versus what is a DTU and all of that other stuff. It's Microsoft makes all of that just ridiculously complicated, and it's impossible to figure it out pretty much. But as near as I can tell. So when I was thinking it was provisioned, like it'd be actually provisioned, or if they come out with provisioned, right, that'd probably be a next logical step for Microsoft. It's still insanely expensive to run if the vCores are, equivalent, right? In terms of, I just don't know how it's going to perform in that sort of thing. So it's serverless. The biggest point, the takeaway on this one is that it's the crappy version of Azure SQL database, right, that you're getting within Fabric. So is it going to be worth anything? Who knows? I can't test it. But that's some straight facts about the Fabric databases. Right now, again, whether you run it in Fabric or run it over here, I guess you're saving 52 cents, right? So there you go. That's all I have for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.